Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third back to school live stream. It's been such an awesome week hearing from so many talented and inspiring people in tech and connecting with all of you who are attending. Today, we get to talk to Ted Sanders from OpenAI, all about Ted's career in tech, his advice for developers in the age of AI, and of course, generative AI and GPT, which is OpenAI's large multimodal model that Ted works on. I'm Corey C., Codecademy's content marketing manager, and over in the chat, we're joined by Fede Garcia Lorca, our community manager, who will be on hand to answer your questions. And if we have time at the end of the discussion, we may pull a few questions from the chat. So keep the conversation going. And as always, abide by the community standards and be respectful. Let me tell you a little bit more about Ted. Ted Sanders is a machine learning engineer at OpenAI, where, in his words, he's a GPT-4 whisperer. So he researches what GPT is bad at and tries to improve it. Hi, Ted. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Corey. Great to be here.
Yeah. So you've been at OpenAI for almost 2 years?
Yep.
And before that, you had an impressive career at Netflix, and you were a physicist at Stanford, which is pretty cool. Take us back, though, to the very beginning of your coding journey. How did you learn to code?
I think the first time that I did anything with code might have been on neopets.com, where you could go around, you could paste HTML or dynamic HTML into your web store. I knew nothing about it, but found some snippets and saw on the web that, okay, if you paste this into your store, you could add like trailers behind your cursor, cool things like that. That might have been my first exposure to programming.
That makes me so happy to hear. We know so many people here at Codecademy and just other people who code who got started with like Neopets, MySpace, that kind of thing. So that makes me very happy to hear.
Yeah, it was kind of cool back in the day where users could change their websites more than today, where it's like, okay, you make your Facebook profile and it's all made for you. Back then, it was a little bit more of Wild West.
Totally. So were you entirely self-taught when it comes to programming?
I mean, I would say that I am still learning to program. It has been a long journey. It's not like I figured it out when I was 16 and I was some whiz and had it solved then. I remember I went off to college and didn't really know what I wanted to do. Signed up for electrical engineering because I had heard online that it used physics, but knew nothing about it. And then my freshman year had to take intro to C programming. And I actually felt quite a bit of anxiety back then where I was like, oh man, I'm already behind. There are these other kids who learned to program in high school, or maybe their parents taught them. And I had some assignments where I was like, oh, I was so frustrated. I was just literally crying because I didn't know how to get the code to do what I wanted it to do. And I think, yeah, for me, learning to program has genuinely been a very gradual process where I learned a little bit in college with C and assembly, did a little bit more in grad school with Mathematica. One of my grad school roommates helped teach me Python. And then I took some CS classes along the way, despite never being a computer science major officially. And then pivoted into data science, worked at Netflix on the recommendation algorithms, learned a lot there. And now, yeah, I'm a full-fledged machine learning engineer at OpenAI, coding every day, all day, and still I'm learning. So for me, it's been a kind of lifelong journey. Maybe starting with Neopets and now culminating in AI.
I love that. And at any point, did you use Codecademy?
I actually did. I think back in 2012, maybe when Codecademy was just a year old, I knew someone who knew Zach Sims. Not sure if they were friends or not, but heard about Codecademy through that, I believe. Tried it out. I was actually a big fan back then. I feel like there's so much opportunity to improve educational materials, make things more interactive. And I think I really liked what Codecademy was doing there. I promise I'm not a shill. This is just my genuine opinion. And it's actually one thing that I'm actually very excited about large language models too. Again, not a shill, just my genuine opinion. But like we're really moving, I think, more and more towards a world where we can get basically cheap interactivity. Like it used to be in the past, if you have students learning a topic, no matter the topic, whether it was from papyrus scrolls, whether it was from lecturing, whether it was from watching great content on YouTube, it's all kind of one way. There's no interactivity. If you don't understand something, you just kind of fall off the wagon. You don't understand how it works. But I think the really best way to teach is with interactivity. It's very expensive to have a teacher do it, but if you can have things like Codecademy, things like ChatGPT that can sort of take you along step by step and give you customized feedback, I think it's super, super useful.
Yeah, definitely. So what got you initially interested in AI? Was it the data science kind of natural progression? And then how did your career take you, I guess, to OpenAI?
Yeah, my career has bounced around all over the place. If you at one point sat me down and said, "Oh, what path would you like your career to take over the next 10 years?" I would not have predicted the path that it took. I don't think anyone would give that kind of answer. I think the way that it's bounced around has given me a lot of perspective. So how I got interested in I mean, I think it's honestly just genuine curiosity. I expect a lot of you in the audience might feel the same way. Just sort of really basic philosophical questions about like, how do we know what we know? I think like the philosophy of epistemology of kind of how do we know what's true has always been interesting to me. So I've kind of always been drawn to statistics and probability. I like playing games where those concepts come in pretty frequently. And then I think it's also just interesting to think about like, what is the trajectory of technology? Like the reason that you and me and everyone else, it's like here, we probably have access to electricity, to indoor plumbing, to refrigeration, to all sorts of luxuries that people did not have 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Most of that is because of new technology. Much of it came from the Industrial Revolution or post-industrial revolution. So it's always just really interesting to think about like, what is the next frontier of technology? What can we do with objects in the world that make our lives easier? And today it feels like AI is kind of the most fertile frontier.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, like you were saying, a lot of people share that same interest. And, the AI sector is drawing a lot of interest right now. And there's a lot of job opportunities, a lot of organizations prioritizing AI. But I think for a lot of self-taught developers or career switchers or just people who don't have an advanced degree, it can feel really daunting or just like totally out of reach. So I was wondering, like, what do you think the most important skills for developers to have now? Like, what are the most important skills for developers to have now if they aspire to work in AI?
Yeah. I mean, I think no one knows exactly how AI is going to change things. No one knows exactly what AI is going to be like in a few years. My suspicion is that AI is going to make software development more valuable. I think like if you look at analogs in history, when spreadsheets came out in say the 80s, did that mean accountants were no longer needed? No, it actually made accountants more valuable because now they were more effective. It was kind of a complement to their labor. I feel like the same is likely with AI. Like using ChatGPT, honestly, I am much more productive than I would be otherwise. It helps answer my questions when I don't know how to do something. Like GitHub Copilot can write code for me without me having to go look up the right functions and methods. So I think AI is going to make software developers more productive. I think that impact is likely to be heterogeneous. I think there are two ways that it could go. I think you could tell one story of like, okay, maybe you have really experienced, really talented developers. Maybe you have developers who are more junior. Is it going to help them equally? Is it going to help one more than the other? I think one story you can tell is that, oh, maybe this is actually a good thing for the experienced developers, but actually bad for juniors, because it's like junior developers are now kind of getting replaced with AI. And now the senior developers can now just have AIs kind of be their minions, do the grunt work, and continue adding the value from kind of their insight and their human creativity. I actually don't think that's going to be the way that it plays out. I think it's actually going to help out junior developers more, because I think a lot of the value from senior developers comes from having a vast kind of repository of knowledge of like, oh, I know how to do this. I've seen this before. AI now can kind of outsource some of that knowledge where it's like, oh, I don't know how to do something, but I can still do it quickly because I just ask ChatGPT to write the code. Obviously, ChatGPT can't do complex things, but for quick and dirty things, it's actually a fantastic tool. So I expect that number one, AI will make software developers more productive. And number two, I think it actually is going to probably help kind of junior developers more than senior developers. But this is just my opinion. We'll see how it goes. And there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, totally. You kind of answered the next thing I was going to ask you, but something that's top of mind for us at Codecademy is like how tools like ChatGPT are going to change the way that people learn how to code. So somebody who's starting from absolute beginner and this is their first introduction to coding. And there's been, a lot of discourse about whether this is the demise of coding. And I just wanted to know, like, what's your take? Is coding dead?
Oh, I think coding is absolutely not dead. I think coding is only going to become more valuable. It could be, maybe in the long run, you could make the argument that coding is dead. Again, relying on historical analogy, like you could look back at the old days of computing. People were using punch cards. People were programming in assembly. You could say today, oh yeah, who's programming in punch cards? Who's programming in assembly today? Almost no one. But programming is still super useful and a much, much larger industry now than it was back then. So I'd say the consistent trend has been that humans are kind of giving instructions to computers at higher and higher levels of abstraction. So it could be that, yeah, maybe if these language models get good enough, they're definitely not good enough today, that we'll have more and more people developing software without having to write as many lines of code, without having to write as much boilerplate. Just like today, you can now program a computer without punching as many punching as many punch cards as you needed to back in the day. But I really expect that, yeah, in the short to medium, maybe even long term, software development will just become more important and more powerful. And I think, at least for me, I'm envious. I wish I had ChatGPT back when I was learning how to program, because it's like, yeah, I remember, yeah, in college, like trying to learn how to program in C, and like my program wouldn't compile, it wouldn't run, and like I didn't know why, and it was just so frustrating. And it's like, well, I can't learn when I'm stuck. But now with ChatGPT, it's like, oh, I can ask, why is this the way? Oh, is there some function I don't know about? Is there a cleaner way to do it? And like, you got to be careful. Sometimes it lies to you. Sometimes it makes things up. But it's super helpful for just kind of learning the basics, getting up to speed, asking questions that you might feel embarrassed asking in public or more experienced coworkers. So for me, it's been great.
Yeah, I completely share that sentiment. And like, we just put out a bunch of new courses and case studies so that people can learn like how to use ChatGPT in their workflow as a developer, or just even like get better at writing prompts and stuff like that. I wanted to zoom out a little bit and ask you, well, so Codecademy just launched a ChatGPT plugin, which was really cool for our engineers to get to work on and hopefully useful for learners to use. And I was wondering, like, what are some other ways that individuals can get started with OpenAI's APIs and its developer platform? Like, what resources are out there?
Yeah, great question. So OpenAI, we make the product ChatGPT. We also have this API. That's part of our mission. Even though we're OpenAI, yeah, we're not all about open source. We definitely think this technology has consequences, but we are about open access. So we have this API. We want people to build with our technology. We don't want to keep it to ourselves. Really easy to go to openai.com, make an account, get a developer key, get some free credits, and you can actually build your own applications using ChatGPT's intelligence to do all sorts of different things. A few, I'd say, good resources to get started there. One, just read the documentation on our website that can help you get started. Number two, I used to run the OpenAI Cookbook, which is a repository on GitHub, which has a whole bunch of code examples and snippets that show how to get started with the OpenAI API, how to deal with common pain points like counting tokens, handling rate limits, that sort of thing, and has some cool examples too of how you can use the API with things like vector databases for information lookup, that sort of thing.
Cool. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you're really excited about and that you can talk about?
Yeah, right now I'm working on better ways of measuring what GPT is good at and what it's bad at. It's kind of funny. I think a lot of products that are designed, like you go to a car company like Toyota, it's like, okay, they design the car, they know what it's going to look like, they build the car, it does what they expect. It's really like they're inventing things. For us, making language models, it's actually a little bit different. I think it's more of a process of discovery than invention. where we can come up with a recipe, we can build these cool language models, but even though we built it, that doesn't mean we know what they're good at, what they're bad at. It doesn't mean we know the best way to use them, the best way to prompt them. We're kind of like the paintbrush factory. And it's like, yeah, maybe we have a little bit more experience than everyone else dealing with paintbrushes. We can tell you which end to hold. But at the end of the day, probably going to be people outside of our company who figure out the cool things that you can do with GPT, who figure out good ways of prompting it. So for me, I'm just trying to help all of us at OpenAI get smarter by measuring what is the model doing well, what is it doing poorly. When we hear from you guys using the API on Twitter, via our feedback forms, via forums, just anywhere that like, oh, the model's doing this poorly, the model's doing this poorly. For me, my job is to try and look into that, to try and quantify that so that then we can target it and make the model better.
Cool. And then like, can you demystify what is like a day in the life of Ted at OpenAI? Are you like in meetings all day, or is it heads down coding? Like what's it like?
A mix of both. There's a lot of teamwork, a lot of meetings, but then there's also a lot of coding. So I'd say probably every single day I'm meeting with other people. Every single day I'm writing code. Every single day I'm trying to get us to a place where we're more productive and more knowledgeable than the day before. Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Cool. I also, switching gears, I wanted to ask you about artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which I understand is a big part of OpenAI's mission. First of all, how do you explain AGI?
Yeah, AGI, artificial general intelligence. There's no consensus definition, but really I think people just mean a computer that is as smart as a person and can think in some ways similar to the way that people think. I imagine the closer we get to AGI, the more blurry that definition and that line will become. Like in some ways, GPT is already smarter than me. It probably knows more facts than I do, but in many ways, it's still far, far inferior to how you or I think, where we can kind of reflect, we can reason. We're not going to confidently lie through our teeth when we're not sure what the answer is to something. So I think artificial general intelligence, yeah, the dream is that we can make computers that can think like people. No one knows exactly how to get there. OpenAI's mission is to try and build that, or at least try and help the world build that, and to make the benefits of AGI broadly accessible to everyone. I'm not an AGI Kool-Aid drinker. I don't think it's a year away. I don't think it's 2 years away. I think it's going to take a lot of hard work to get there. And I think the closer we get, the further it's going to look. But looking at the rate of progress in AI over the past few years, it's just been stunning. So I am super excited to see what gets built over the next 5 years.
Yeah. Sorry, I put you on the spot and asked you to pull out your crystal ball there for a second. Let's see. I think the last overarching question I wanted to ask you is sort of like what steps developers can take now to make themselves stand out and distinguish themselves in the age of AI. We talked about a couple of things, but just, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, like suppose you're a developer, you see AI coming, you have this insight, you're like, what should I do differently? What should I learn? How can I be more valuable? I genuinely don't know the answer. It's something we'll have to see. I think one mistake to watch out for is I think it can be a mistake to think, oh, AI is the big thing that's coming. Therefore, the only thing that I'm going to learn is, say, how to prompt engineer large language models and call them via APIs. Because I think in many cases, what matters is actually skills complementary to AI, in addition to the skill of using the AI. So for example, like if you want to make an app that uses AI in some cool new way, you don't just have to figure out how to make the AI do something cool and new, you also have to make the app. So I think in many cases, there are going to be complementary skill sets where if you want to do something with AI, you also have to develop some developer skills to do the thing that you want to do. Again, going to historical analogies, it's like, okay, when electricity came to the scene, and now you had these steam-powered factories moving over from big steam generators to now electrical motors. Like if you're a factory making shoes, and you're like, okay, electricity is coming. This is going to change shoemaking. I'm going to become an expert in electricity. Like, you weren't wrong. All shoe factories today use electricity. But the thing that makes like a great shoe is not that like the shoe designers at Nike were like, okay, electricity is the key. We're going to become experts in electricity. But they're like, okay, electricity might allow us to set up our factory differently. It might allow us to change the processes by which we develop shoes, by which we manufacture them. It might change the way that we can, configure our whole supply chain. But at the end of the day, the goal is not to use electricity. The goal is to deliver user value by making cool shoes. So I think similarly with AI, it's important to learn AI, figure out what can it do well, what can't it do well, how do you steer it, how do you control it, but don't neglect, I think, the complementary skills around it, because at the end of the day, if you're building something, you should be building something cool and useful, and you need all the other pieces in addition to AI.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I can't wait to see what electric shoes you come up with next. Before I bring it over to Fede, was there anything we didn't talk about that you think is important to your story or that you would want people to know?
No, I would love to get questions from the audience, hear what all of you are curious about.
Awesome. All right, Fede, what are people saying in the chat?
I'm back. People are saying all kinds of things, so that's pretty exciting. I'm gonna go over to the chat. I already prompt everybody to drop their questions. We can start with an easy one, Ted. Super,
Great.
very straightforward.
I love easy.
Easy questions is, what's your opinion on society's growing dependence on AI?
Yeah, society's growing dependence on AI. I don't think the dependence is very strong right now. I think if we woke up tomorrow and there was no AI, society would continue. Might depend a little bit on how you define AI, like is Google ad targeting AI, because maybe that would destroy $1 trillion in value if that disappeared tomorrow. I think it is a concern. Yeah, as we become more dependent on more and more technologies, including AI, yeah, there is a worry that that does make society more brittle. If, say, like a geomagnetic storm hits, we lose electrical grids, we lose computers, we may be worse off than, say, folks were 50, 100 years ago because of our increasing dependence on computers. But for now, I don't think the dependence is too dangerous. For now, it feels like it's adding more value than it's kind of taking away in brittleness and lack of resilience.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very sort of, this is one more tool in the tool set. It's not so much dependent, it's just dependent in general, I guess. Just technology in general that we keep leaning on more and more.
Yeah, and on
I can
a
see
micro
how,
level.
Yeah.
I was just gonna append on a micro level. It's like I definitely have to calibrate how much do I rely on AI, because I will say that, yeah, GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT has made me a more effective programmer, but in some ways it's also made me a lazier programmer, where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to look things up. I'm not going to need to learn them. I'm just going to type in like a comment describing the function that I want, and then just kind of sit back, waiting expectantly for GitHub Copilot to autocomplete it. And in some ways that's good. It makes me more productive, but in some ways it's also bad. Like a while ago, I had GPT write a recursive function for me because I didn't want to think through it and do it myself. And I was like, yeah, this looks right. Let me test it. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, wait, that part was wrong. I had to fix it. Try it again. No, it still doesn't work. Wait, there's another part that's wrong. Let me test it again. Oh, that didn't work. Actually, this function's garbage. I need to do it from scratch. So there's still some calibration of kind of figuring out where does it help? Where does it hurt? Definitely, I think like today with Google Maps, I rely less on kind of memorizing the layout of the city. And in a way, yeah, I drive better, but if Google Maps were to disappear, I would be a worse navigator.
It's almost like another Wikipedia moment of how much can we rely on this, and you're too lazy to look for your own resources, I guess, and sources. There's another question here in the chat. What advice would you have for someone starting out as a developer? I guess in the context of AI.
Yeah, I think the advice totally depends on what you want to do. For me, I think my journey, I was curious and I followed my curiosity. But I think, yeah, if you want to build websites, then learn the skills that you'll need to build websites. If you want to, build software that computes things, learn how to do that. So I think it all depends on what you want to do, but I would just say do things that seem interesting and useful.
Nice. Yeah, I guess there's a related question here about which things you should learn if you're going into AI. So things like machine learning, algebra, math, statistics. What are some of the fields for maybe aspiring data researchers or data scientists that they should be focusing on?
Yeah, even in AI, there's a wide spectrum of things that you can be doing, because it's like in AI, yeah, you could be training the models. That's going to require a very different skill set than if you're trying to optimize the models, if you're trying to use the models, if you're trying to build products that use the models. All of those things are different. I would say if you are trying to do things at a low level, close to the hardware, you really care about performance and efficiency. That's where it's going to be useful to potentially learn CUDA, learn GPU programming, things like C or Rust. But for most of us, we don't need to do that. I think there's going to be many more people kind of working on applications than there are who are going to be kind of optimizing these AI models like at the hardware level. And if you're worried more about applications, then yeah, if you want to make apps, learn the languages and skills needed to make apps. If you want to make websites, yeah, learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript. In the machine learning world, I'd say Python is very popular. Python is my kind of favorite go-to language. So if you are interested in doing things in machine learning and in training models, Python is a great place to start. If you're looking to do kind of more statisticsy things, you can do R. And in general, I think if you're trying to become a well-rounded programmer, it's good to learn a few different languages. You don't want to be monolingual because there are a lot of concepts repeated from one to the next.
Nice. Yeah, Python is always a great advice. I take 100% Python all day. A question that's a little different here. If you want to get into the field of AI, but not as a researcher, what are some of the other things that you can learn while you're still involved in AI, but maybe not in the traditional sense that people think about it, like training the models or actually doing, the modeling itself?
Yeah, again, kind of a broad question. If you're trying to get into AI, but not as a researcher, many different paths. So you can also just work as kind of a regular software developer, not researching anything. And there, yeah, you can have backend software developers who are maybe helping to, in say the case of OpenAI, build our API, the infrastructure that's built on. You're not researching anything, but you're building lots of cool products. There's also front-end developers who are, say, building the OpenAI website. We have salespeople. So there are definitely kind of sales roles, marketing roles, go-to-market roles for selling these kinds of products where you still need a good degree of fluency. You have to understand what the AI is good at, what it's bad at. Requires a very different skill set than, say, a machine learning researcher, but still is very well within the realm of AI. There are jobs and roles in kind of helping companies implement things and answering questions about AI. There are policy roles. So there are people who work in Washington, D.C., thinking about what is the right legislation for AI. There are lawyers who are involved in potentially coming up with legal strategies, potentially coming up with litigation in the AI space. There are judges who are ruling on cases in the AI space. So there's a big intersection between legal and AI. I think in many cases, one way to make yourself valuable in a career is actually, instead of finding like one thing and becoming the best person at one thing, which can often be a crowded path. Like there are many people who want to be the best tennis player in the world. There are many people who maybe want to be the best Python developer in the world, but you find like 2 or 3 skills and you become really good at those. And there's actually a lot less competition in the intersection. So if you're good at like sales and AI, now you might be the best AI salesperson in the world, and you're not really having to compete with the best AI people or the best salespeople. You're only competing with people at that intersection.
That's a great take. Being a bit more of a Renaissance person, I guess, when it comes to AI and other tools. We have time for a couple extra questions here. One of them is, what's the most unique or creative use of AI that you've come across?
Ooh, most unique or creative? There have been a bunch of creative things. I mean, I think the most visually stunning I think the most stunning ones are the visual ones. So I think image generation, video generation has been super cool. I think I'm personally excited by natural language interfaces to software where you just say what you want, and not all the time, but most of the time the program knows what you want to do. And I think the least interesting applications are probably just like kind of ChatGPT or ChatGPT skins, where you have this GPT conversation back and forth. And the really cool ones are the ones that do a lot of work behind the scenes to kind of stitch a whole bunch of model calls together to do something complex and useful. And I think the ones that end up with a visual product, like end up building a website, end up building an animation, those are always pretty fun.
Nice. And to close it off, going back to Python, this may be a bit more technical, but in your experience for what you've seen working with these tools day in and day out, do you feel like Python is still remaining kind of like the go-to language when it comes to machine learning, or are you seeing other technologies or maybe AI first languages rise that could, threaten the dominant place of Python in the future when it comes to learning to code and getting into these kind of tools?
Yeah, I'd say Python is number one. So if you want to do stuff with AI, I would say easy, just do Python. Not really familiar with any big kind of AI programming languages that are coming. I think sometimes it can be a mistake to focus too much on languages anyway, because again, it's like under the hood, they're all doing the same thing. They're moving electrons and transistors, just with different words in your code editor. But simple answer, do Python, and we'll see in 5 to 10 years what the landscape looks like then.
Okay, fair enough. Back to Python, like we said before. Well, thank you so much, Ted, for your time today. Thank you, Corey, for hosting and asking all these awesome questions. And thank you to the chat for being here with us today. We hope that you enjoy your time with us. We have more events happening this week. Please stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe to our social media, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and all those good stuff if you want us to keep up with what Codecademy is up to. And we will see you on the next event. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by, and have a great day. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, everyone.